All right, so to get us started, I usually like to put the new door right in the hole where the old door came out of, okay? Now, you're going to want probably about a 16th of an inch over here on your hinge side and a probably good 1/8 of an inch over here on the other side. Across the top, you're probably going to want another 1/8 of an inch or so. The bottom isn't as critical depending on what kind of flooring you have. If you've got hardwood floor, if you've got carpet, you don't want it dragging across the carpet real bad, you know. It needs to clear the carpet by, enough so that it's not dragging. But this door was a little bit tight on the bottom. This edge over here on the left side here was pretty even until it got to the bottom. Well, luckily there was some movement in the door frame down there, and I was able to pull the frame over a little bit by putting a couple of trim screws underneath the hinge. That way you're never going to see it. It pulled over just what I needed right there, and that's solved that problem. Now, if you're in an older house and you've got 10 layers of paint on the door, or even more, and your door is fitting really tight, you may need to shave the door a little bit. Now, you can take these and put them on a table saw, and that works pretty well. Actually, if you don't have a table saw, you can use a hand planer, and that hand planer will cut off a pretty good edge, 1/8 of an inch all the way down, and it'll be pretty nice and even cut right there. If you don't have a hand planer, you don't have a table saw, but you do have a skill saw, a rotary saw, I don't recommend cutting that free-handed because it's going to be squiggly and it's just not going to look good. But what you can do is you can clamp a straight edge on the door and rig the distance so that it's right where your blade needs to be to cut off 1/8 of an inch. And when you do that and you just ride that saw up against your straight edge, and you'll come up with a pretty good cut that way. That'll work. It's not the greatest, but it will work and give you a fairly straight cut. If you're finding any value in this video, please subscribe to this channel. I come out with videos like this as often as I can. Okay, so if you're working with a new door frame, then this part won't matter at all. You can put your hinges wherever you want, but we're not. We're working with an established door frame and the hinge pockets are already cut out, so we have to stick with these locations. Now, by the way, if you do wind up cutting your door, don't cut the door from the hinge side. You'll make it a little bit weaker by doing that, especially if you're only taking off a small amount. Cut from the other side. All right, so I like to establish my top hinge first, and you'll see why here in just a minute. So let's measure this from the top. All right, we have 7 1/8. Okay, now remember earlier I said that I wanted to keep the gap at the top at about 1/8 of an inch. Okay, so that means what I want to do is I want to measure from my door down 7 inches, and that'll leave the 1/8 inch gap at the top that I wanted to keep. All right, so let's come down 7 inches and we'll put a mark here. And let's go ahead and square this off. All right, next you see we have a gap here between where the hinge ended and where the doorstop begins. If we measure that, it's right at 3/8 of an inch. So we don't want to put our hinge at 3/8 of an inch on the door because it'll wind up rubbing on this and it'll be too tight, right? We want to leave about 1/8 of an inch of a gap. So what we're going to do is we're going to put the hinge pocket at 1/4 of an inch. All right, so that way we'll leave 1/8 of an inch gap. And I do like to leave 2 marks so we can get it fairly straight. All right, so you probably noticed here that we're using these rounded corners instead of these square ones like this right here. These are a little bit more difficult to cut out to make that edge look nice, but it is what it is. That's what we're doing. So I kind of like to use a square to kind of help things stay straight, And I've got my edge here at on my 1/4 inch marks. So we're just going to mark this and try not to let it move. Now, if your door is beveled, meaning one side is wider than the other, you'll want to make sure when you do this part to turn the hinge the right way, right? So this is turned to the inside of the door. If your door, you just measure both sides. You measure this side and you measure this side. If they're both the same, it's not beveled. Most doors aren't beveled, so it's probably not going to be an issue for you, but it is something to check. All right, so I'm going to take this out so we can cut this out. Now I'm going to do one with a router, and then I'm going to do one with a chisel. All right, so to set up the router, this is a very simple thing that I like to do. I like to put the router on a flat surface. I've got this vise right here. Push it all the way down so that the blade contacts the flat surface like that, and then lock it. Right, so it stays there. And then this is your depth adjustment. I'll put a hinge inside the depth adjustment and tighten this up down on top of the hinge and lock this down just like that. Now we have our hinge depth. Then we will plunge the router down till it stops and lock it again. And that's it. Now the depth of the blade is set to the depth of the hinge. All right, so we have our hinge pocket all drawn out. Now, did anybody catch what I did when I marked it? All that talk about putting this facing the right direction, and I went and marked it backwards. It was the end of the day, so I don't know what to say. At least I caught it before I, cut the door and then found out, oh, that's backwards. So I'm going to do this one with the router, but I actually like to take a knife and make us scribe a nice line on here first, right? Now, by the way, you're going to want to wear safety glasses for this part. So yeah, that's all there is to it. We just got to stay within our line as best as we can. All right, so we'll test fit the hinge. It's nice and flush, just like it should be. It's not perfect. I don't have a jig. It's close enough. All right, now one way to help get the screw started is to go ahead and take a Phillips screwdriver and put it right in the center, and then give it a little tap. That screw will perfectly go down into that hole. All right, so what I've done here is I've hung the door on this top hinge that we just cut out. But these haven't been cut out yet, right? So I flipped them open so they're against the door. And I put my 1/4 inch marks here so that I'm a 1/4 inch away from the edge. Now, of course, that 1/4 inch, yours may be different depending on the distance where the hinge is from the door stop. So 1/4 inch is what's on my door. And I did the same thing on the bottom. So what we can do now, and now we're hung here, don't be too alarmed if you try to close the door and it won't close, because these haven't been cut out yet, and that's pushing the door this way. So if it don't close yet, don't worry. All right, so I got my 1/4 inch right there, so we're going to mark the hinge, right? And then we're going to trace around it. Now, when you're holding the pencil, hold it like this, away at that angle, because if you hold it like this, your mark is going to be away from the hinge, and it's going to be too big. So hold it at this angle and just trace around it. Now we have a perfect location where our hinge is, right? Do the same thing to the bottom hinge. Put it on your mark and do the same thing that I just did right there. Now we have two perfect locations. If the hinges are in a little bit crooked, it's going to transpose to the door or transfer to the door. All right, so we're cutting out this middle hinge here with a chisel. Now, what I like to do first is take the chisel and go around the whole perimeter, because what'll happen is when I'm shaving this out, it'll help this wood break off a little cleaner if it's already pre-cut. Now, to get around this corner here, I can't keep the chisel flat up and down like that. I have to angle it, just like so. And that will go right around the corner, fairly straight. One advantage of doing it this way is you can do this right in your house. I decided to bring it outside, but I didn't have to. I could have done it right there. It makes a fairly minimal mess, as long as you got a shop vac handy. All right, so we got our perimeter established there. Now let's just go ahead and chip away. And just keep on going until you get where you want. This does give you a little bit more control over what you're cutting. You know, the router is, you know, if you make a mistake, it's like zip, uh-oh. This doesn't do that, but the router is, you know, gives you a more even bottom here. So you gotta kind of chisel this until it's all pretty even. Now in this part here, I find that a razor knife is not that bad. You could use the chisel, but this actually does work too. Just be careful not to let it get you. All right, let's give it a test fit. Pretty good, not too bad at all. All right, same thing as before. Let's try to get our screwdriver right smack in the middle and give it a little tap. And I'll go ahead and put the rest of the screws in. I've already done the bottom hinge, so I'm going to get that one ready, and then I'll meet you back in the house. All right, so I got the hinges on. Let's just go ahead and see if it all lines up. Very good, no problem. Let's get our pins in. So very good, that worked fine. Door's closing fine, our gap is fairly good. Now if you run into a problem, right, where they won't go together because one is slightly higher than the other one, all you have to do is loosen the screws in the door frame and give it a good wiggle. They should go together, put the pin in, and then tighten the screws back up, and that should fix that. Also, I did a video a while back about a crooked door frame. Door was sagging. What you can do is take a crescent wrench and bend the hinges so that they align again, right? And raise that up. Can't do it a lot, you know. If you're way off, then you got a big problem. But if you're just a little bit off, bending that hinge will work. What you need to do, though, is prop up whichever side of the door is causing you a problem so that it'll stay. And you'll want to take the pins out of at least 2 of the hinges so that you know it'll move. All right, so the first thing I like to do to establish the doorknob location is mark the exact height of the old one. Now I've already got a door striker in here because it was here from the original door. So what I'll do is I'll mark right smack in the middle of where that is at, and then I like to take a square and then follow that over right here, right? So that I have a mark out here where I can see it. All right, then the next thing I'll do is I'll put my pencil right perfectly on the line and grab the door by the bottom and pull the door open. All right, now that we've got our height established, there's a couple of different ways that we could go about this. One is you can get the fancy kit that comes with the jig, right? Here's the rest of it right here. It comes with the hole saws and all that stuff. Oh, that's all falling out. Anyway, yeah, this thing is like 25 bucks. And if you go online and read the reviews, it's got probably the worst reviews I've ever seen. But it's kind of nice, I guess. You can clamp it on the door, right? And actually, it's got 2 screws here to screw into the door. But look how much, I'm holding it firm here. Look how much movement that thing's got, right? And that's what people said, it was junk. So you could do it this way. This allows for the 2 3/8 or the 2 3/4 back set, right? Or you could take a simple $5 square that you can get from Harbor Freight, right? I've got my height out here that I drew a minute ago, and line your square up to that and draw your line right there. You're going to paint the door anyway. Now you see on here 2 3/8, that's right to the center. Do the same thing on the other side of the door, draw the line. And then what I did to keep the drill bit, the hole saw from walking around when you get it started, is I took a punch and put it right on my 2 3/8 and made a nice mark right there to keep that drill bit from walking around. So I'm just going to go with that. I've got my own hole saw and all that stuff, and I don't need that kit. So I also taped the hole saw, so that I don't go through the door. If you just drill through the door, it's going to blow out the other side and it's not going to look good. All right, so I also changed out the drill bit in my hole saw so I can see it come out of the door earlier. And I also will be able to tell, because I have a mark like this on the other side, if it comes out over here, you know, if it's off the center of that mark, then I know I'm not holding my drill straight. So that kind of gives you an early warning. Put that right on my mark and try to hold the drill as straight as you can. All right, so I've drilled through most of the door, but I've got to my tape, so I need to stop so I can flip it around. There we go. All right, so to find the center of this door, the door is 1 3/8, so it's 11/16 to the center. So I carefully measured 11/16, and I checked it one way, 11/16, and then I checked it the other way. And if they match, then you're in the center. Did the same thing here with the punch, marked my center point to try to keep the drill bit from walking around. Now on these drill bits, I didn't mention earlier, the first larger hole was 2 1/8, and this one is 1 inch. So that's the sizes you need. And I went ahead and extended this one as well to try to give me an early warning inside of here so I can see if I'm holding it straight or not. And there we go. Don't need no jig. Works fine just like that. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and cut my thing out for this. I don't really like the looks of just putting this barrel in there. I like the whole thing. So go ahead and put that in there and center it up. And you can hold it down with your thumb. Make sure it's centered up good and then trace around it. I already did. And then you can either cut this out with a router or a chisel. I'm not going to show that part because it's the same thing as cutting out the hinge. If you put it in the router, do like I showed you before, and use this thickness, put it in the router, depth gauge, and use that thickness to cut out the depth of this. Since this is curved, I would use a smaller bit to get around these curves, all right? Or if you use a chisel, probably use a pretty small chisel. Some of these are square, and those are actually easier to cut out with a chisel, but this one has rounded corners. So I'm going to do the best I can on that. All right, so I went ahead and cut this out with the router. It's just easier. And I used a smaller bit, probably about 1/4 inch, so I could get around these round areas right here. And I went ahead and pre-drilled the holes to keep anything from cracking. Now remember, we set this back at 2 3/8. Well, most of these things have a operating thing here. There's 2 3/4. There's 2 3/8. So just make sure that that matches up with what your back set is. And it's nice and flush. Oh yeah. And I'm just going to use the same doorknob. Now one thing to note is you don't really need a big fancy screwdriver or an angled one like this one right here. I just took this simple screwdriver and put a piece of heat shrink over it. If you're worried about scratches, you can do the same thing. Yeah, the screwdriver sits at an angle, but you know, it's not that big of a deal. All right, well, hopefully the door works. Let's try it. Perfect. Works like a champ. All right, guys, well, if you've watched till this point, I really appreciate it. I hope this video has been helpful for you. Thanks for watching.